beautiful crocodile stitch clutch. It has a zipper, and it is also lined and has some reinforced edges for durability. This clutch is the one we are going to make today, and it was made with a 3.5mm hook. This one here was also made with a 3.5mm hook. It's a gray on the outside, and then I lined it with pink for a bit of a pop of color. And I'm also going to show you a couple other examples. This one was made with a 4mm hook, and you can see the difference in the two here. So it's just a little bit bigger. And again, this one is lined as well and also reinforced. This one I made with a 4.5mm hook, and it is also lined, but I did not reinforce it like I have the others. So these are a bit more sturdy and not as easily bent as this one. And so this is a pretty versatile pattern. If you want, you can add rows, you can subtract rows, you can decrease or increase your hook size. Just make sure to take everything else into consideration as you go. So let's get started. What we are going to need is 1 skein of Boutique Unforgettable yarn by Red Heart. Of course, it doesn't have to be this yarn. It could be any medium for worsted weight yarn that you choose. I just like this stuff because it kind of goes from being a bit thinner to a bit thicker, and I like the texture that that gives. And I also like how it's variegated. It fades from one color to another, and I just think it's really pretty. So, and I've had lots of success with it. I've only ever used this type of yarn for this pattern, but that's not to say that no other yarn will work either. One other thing that you could do is have a few different colors of yarn. In this pattern we have 8 rows, so either 2 or 4 different colors of yarn, and then you can switch colors for each row, and that can give a nice ombre look or colorful look, whatever you're going for. So I did leave a lot of options out for this pattern, mainly just because it was long enough with all the pictures I took and how much everything needs to be explained. So have fun with this pattern. So for our supplies, we have our yarn, and we also have our fabric that we have chosen for the liner for our clutch. This is just your standard really thin cotton fabric that is quite abundant at fabric stores. I do like to use something a bit thicker like corduroy or upholstery fabric, and ooh, denim would probably be really nice too. I might have to try that next time. But there really isn't anything wrong with this. The others just seem more sturdy, but I can't imagine there being any issues with just your regular with the cotton fabric. We also have our plastic canvas, which we will use to sort of give some rigidity to our clutch on the sides of the clutch. Our 8-inch zipper, our darning needle, our tape measure, stitch marker, a couple of our binder clips, and our fabric scissors for cutting our fabric, and of course our 3.5mm crochet hook. So we're going to do something a bit unusual here. We are going to leave about 35 inches of tail on our yarn before we do our initial slip knot, because once we are done the crocheting portion, the crocodile stitch portion of our clutch, we're going to come down to the bottom of the clutch and use this tail to sew shut the bottom of our clutch. So I'm just going to measure out here about 35 inches. So about 35 inches there. And we'll do our slip knot. 30. So for this tutorial, we are going to chain 84. Now, you can, if you want a larger clutch, you can have more chains, or if you want a smaller clutch, you can have less. Just make sure whatever number that you chain is a multiple of 7. So we are going to start by chaining 84. 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so I've got my chain of 84 here, and I have checked and double checked again, and yes, it is exactly 84. And so now what I'm going to do is just make sure that it is not twisted at all, because we don't want it to be twisted and then have half of our double crochets upside down here. And then I'm just going to slip stitch into our very first chain. There's the slip stitch, and then I am going to chain 3, and that is going to count as a double crochet. So now all we're going to do is double crochet in every chain around the loop. Now your loop might not seem very big, and you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a lot smaller clutch than I thought, but it will start to look bigger. So that chain 3 is going to count as 1 double crochet, 2 double crochets, so we're going to have 84 double crochets including our chain 3. All right, so now that we have our first round of double crochets almost complete, we have 84 double crochets, and before we slip stitch into our first chain 3 here, we are just going to make sure that our work is not twisted in any way. And so mine is laying nice and flat, so that's good. And we are just going to slip stitch into our first chain 3 of this row. And that's it for the double crochet portion of this round. So now we are going to start on our scales for the crocodile stitch. So we are going to chain 3, and again this chain 3 is going to count as a double crochet. So we are going to go down our post, so this is our chain 3 post, with 5 double crochets including this one, so we have 4 more to go, and then we are going to chain 1 to form the tip of the scale, and then we are going to go 5 double crochets up the next post. So we sort of fold our work in half here so that we can go down our post. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then chain 1. And then to go up the next post, we just sort of flip our work here and find the next double crochet post. And we go 5 double crochet up that post. One, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now when we lay it out flat, you will see that we have our very first scale of our crocodile stitch. All right, I believe I have remedied the lighting situation a bit here. So we just finished our first scale of the crocodile stitch. So now we are going to skip 5 double crochets. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in the 6th double crochet, we are going to go double crochet 5 down the post. So there's 1 double crochet, 2, 3. Let's get some more yarn here. So there's 1, 2, and 3. 4 and 5. So this is what it looks like right now. We have kind of 1.5 scales. Lost my hook. So we've done 5, so now we do our chain 1, and then we go to the next post. Okay, so next post we go 5 double crochets up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now we have completed our second scale of our crocodile stitch. So I'll do a few more here just to help you get the hang of it. So now we are going to skip 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then in the 6th, we just go straight into our double crochet. We don't chain 1 or anything. We want these to be nice and tight together. Two, 3, 4, 5, chain 1, flip our work here, and up the next post. One. So cliche that my dog is barking at the garbage man. 3, 4, 5. So now we've got 3 scales. Skip 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then into the 6th. We're going to go right into our double crochet here. One thing to note is to try to make our first double crochet here quite tight. So for example, if I leave too much yarn here and make it really loose, it's not going to look as nice. See how these 3 are nice and tightly together, and then this one was going to leave a big loop. So if it starts to look like that, I typically redo it. We don't want them to be too separated. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nice and tight. So there's our first double crochet. Second, third, fourth, 5th, and then chain 1, flip our work so we can go up the next post. Oops, kind of a bit sloppy with my yarn there. One, two, three, four, five, and our little line of scales here is starting to look quite nice. I chose a pretty brightly colored yarn, so I figured it would show up better on camera. So this one's going to be quite colorful. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then into our 6th. This yarn isn't the most forgiving. I do sometimes accidentally snag it on half a piece of yarn. So I wouldn't really recommend this yarn for beginners because it doesn't easily frog either. It'll snag on itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I'll do one more for good measure and then I will meet you back at the end of the round. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Going into the 6th, straight into our double crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, chain 1, turning our work, going up that next post. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's what we've got so far, and I will meet you back at the end of this round. So we're now at the end of our round, and this is what it looks like so far. So now I'm just going to go through how to finish this round and start the next one. So at this point, if you are changing yarns, this is where you would want to slip stitch and then darn off and darn on. So what you would do is you would slip stitch here into your first chain 3, and then darn off, and then when you darn on, you'll be going into these back, the double crochets, and you will be wanting to darn on in between these two scales, so probably in about this stitch right here. So since we are not changing yarns, we are still going to slip stitch into our chain 3, and then we are going to slip stitch into the chain in the back here that is the center between our two scales. So slip stitching through our first chain 3 of our first scale, and then just finding the one that lines up the best in between our two scales, our first and last scale, and slip stitching through there as well. So we're going to chain 3 And again, that is going to count as a double crochet. And then, so what we're going to do for the rest of this round is we're going to double crochet twice on this side of the scale, and then once into the middle of the scale, kind of like the hole, this hole here in the middle of the scale. We go right through the middle of it. And then twice on this side of the scale, and then we are going to put 2 double crochets in the same stitch right here in between our scales. And so that those 2 double crochets are going to go in the same stitch here in the front in our crocodile part, and also in the back in our double crochet part. So we have our chain 3, and so that since this area here is analogous to this area here, we are going to have 2 double crochets in the same stitch, one of which of course being that chain 3. So we have 2 there, and now we're going to go into our stitches in the back here. This can get a bit crowded in the beginning, but it gets better as you go. Oops, I forgot to yarn over. So 1 double crochet and 2 double crochet. And then we're going to go right in the middle here. 1 double crochet in there. And then 2 double crochet on this side in separate stitches. So 1 and 1. So we've got our chain 3 and a double crochet here, double crochet, double crochet, double crochet in the hole, double crochet, and double crochet. So now we're going to go in this bit of a loop here that forms in between our scales when we're doing our crocodile stitch, and then going through to the back double crochet here. You may be sort of skipping one in the back here, and that's fine. So 1 double crochet in there and 2 double crochet. And so both of those went through this loop here in between our 2 scales, and also through the same stitch in the back here of our double crochet row. So now 1 double crochet, 1 double crochet. These are all through the stitches in our back double crochet row. And then double crochet right through our hole in the middle of the scale here. And double crochet through our double crochet row in the back. Oops, snagged here. There we go. 1 and 2. And now we are going to have 2 double crochets in this stitch and the row behind it. So again, we're sort of skipping 1 double crochet of the back row here, and that is okay. So 1 double crochet there, and then in the same stitches, another double crochet there. So let's just pause and take a look at what we've done here. So we've got our chain 3 and our double crochet both in the same stitch. A double crochet, a double crochet, double crochet in our hole here, double crochet, and 2 double crochet in the same hole here in between our scales, and those 2 double crochet also go through the same stitch in the back row here of our double crochet row. And then another double crochet, double crochet, double crochet in the hole, double crochet, and then 2 double crochet in the same stitch here. So I'll go through that a couple more times. One double crochet, one double crochet, double crochet in the hole, double crochet, double crochet, and skipping one there. I have 2 double crochets in here. Alright, so we are almost done our double crochet portion of our second row. And I just want to clarify something that I said earlier when I was saying that we do 2 double crochets on this side of the scale and then sort of skip one and then do the middle one and then 2 on that side. We do skip, you are going to sort of skip one from the double crochet row in the back there, but it doesn't really matter where, and just don't overthink it. As you can see on here, there is a skipped one because we have to do the 2 in here between our scales. We do skip one at somewhere along the way, but don't be sort of freaking out over, oh my gosh, I didn't skip the right one, I better frog all my work and start over again. It's really not a big deal. All that matters is you have 2 on this side, 1 in the middle, 2 on this side, and then 2 in the same stitch in between on the front. So, and it's really not a huge deal if you maybe miss, if you say you only put 1 on this side instead of 2 and you don't realize it until later. It's really not a big deal because it's going to be covered by the next scale that's going to be around here. So I've got a pretty laid back approach to this. And so I'm going to finish this off here. So I've got my 2 double crochets in the loop between these 2 scales. One, 2, and then in the middle, 1, and 2 on this side. And so just like we did with our first round or row, we are going to slip stitch here. And that'll complete our double crochet portion of the row. And then to start our first scale of this row, we are going to chain 3. Oops, caught myself there. 1, 2, 3. A piece of fuzz. and then 4 double crochets for a total of 5, including our chain 3. And chain 1, flip our work, and then another 5 double crochet on the next post here. Trying to see what position it focuses best in. So there's our first double crochet on the second post. Two, 3, 4, and 5. So there is our first scale of our second row. So as you can see, our scales on this row are going to be in between 2 scales from our bottom row. So the next scale will be here, or sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. Next scale will be in between these 2, and the next one will be in between these 2. So you'll see what I'm talking about once we keep going a bit more on this round. So we're skipping 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's one way to approach it, is counting your stitches in between, or you can just skip across to where you have 2 double crochets in the same loop here. So that's why we did that. Having 2 double crochets in the same loop is because those are the 2 that we're going to be using to make our scales. Two, 3, 4, 5. Need more yarn here. Chunk of pink is lasting a while. Alright, so I got 5 and then I chain 1. And then we're going up our second post that's in the same stitch as the one we just double crocheted down. One, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and skipping across to where we have another 2 double crochets in the same stitch between the 2 scales from the below row. So I've got 5, chain 1, flip our work. So we're just going to keep going like this, and I will see you back at the end of this row. So we're now done our crocodile stitch portion of our second row. Ended up being a very pink row. That's just how the yarn goes. And so for the rest of the rounds or rows, we are just going to repeat that second row until we reach the desired amount of rows. And in this pattern, I have a total of 8, but you can do however many that you want. So I guess I'll do a little bit more on this row so you can follow along, but probably won't do too much more because you can just keep going back to how I did the second row if you feel like you need more guidance. I'm just going to try to focus here. Alright, so I've done my slip stitches and my chain 3. And then I'm going to do my other double crochet in the same hole there. And then 2 double crochets on this side, 1 in the hole. Can't really see the hole very well there. There you go. And then 2 here, and we're not going to worry too much about counting our stitches on our back double crochet row here. So this first one is always a little bit tricky. Sometimes it's hard to see where you're at. Oops. Went right in the hole in the middle of our scale there. So we've got 2 here, including our chain 3. 1, 2 on this side of the scale, 1 in the middle, and 2 on this side of the scale. And now we're going to put 2 in this loop here, in between our scales from the previous row. So as you can see, even if I were to screw up and say I just put 1 double crochet on this side and then I missed the next one and I went here and then did my 2 double crochets here, and I kept going and I didn't realize until later that I had missed one. If it's only one once in a while, it's really not going to matter too much because as you can see, the scale row is going to be covering it. So we do still want these stitches to help with you know, durability and to have our stitches to stitch onto with our crocodile stitch, but it's not the end of the world if one is missed. So if you don't realize it until quite a ways down, it's really not worth frogging your work, especially with a yarn like this because it doesn't frog really well. And as you can see, it really didn't leave that much of a gap there in the spot that I missed the stitch. So I'm just gonna go back and do it properly since I didn't get too far ahead before I noticed. Okay, so I'll meet you at the end of this portion of the round just to go over once more how to do the crocodile stitch scales, and then we'll probably break until we get to our very last row. So we've reached the end of our double crochet portion of our third row. So we're just going to slip stitch into our first chain 3. Whoops. And then we're going to chain 3, and that'll count as our first double crochet of our first scale. So now we're going to do 4 more down this post. And chain 1 and turn our work, and then go up the next post here. One, 2, 3, 4. And 5. So we have our first scale of our third row done. So since it's in the middle of these 2 scales, it's pretty much right. It's directly above the 1, 2 rows below. And that's how it's going to continue all the way around. So I am going to complete all 8 rows, and I will meet you back at the top when we are done. Okay, so we have completed our crocodile stitch portion of our clutch. That's what one side looks like, and this is what the other side looks like for mine. You may or may not, you probably aren't going to end up on an end like you would think. So, whoopsie. Doesn't really matter where you are. So like at the end of all of our rounds, we're just going to slip stitch into our chain 3 and then into our double crochet row back here. And then we are going to take out our crochet hook, and we are not going to cut this yarn. Instead, we are just going to slip our stitch marker into where our crochet hook was. And next we are going to move down to where we had our tail at the very beginning of our foundation chain. And as promised, we are going to use that to slip stitch shut the bottom of our clutch. And what I like to do is just slip stitch all the way through, but if you prefer to use your darning needle and just do a running stitch, stitching it shut, that works too, whatever you would like to do. So another option, I'm just gonna zoom back out here. So for this kind of project, especially if you're using a yarn like I am here that fades, that's variegated and changes color as you go, you might like You might like how it looks with the tail on one end, just looking at the colors. I'm pretty happy with the colors on this side and on the other side. But sometimes maybe you would like to have your ends at different points. Maybe like this looks a bit more pink and maybe you really like that and you would want this to be a side and this to be a side, so one side is a lot more green and one side is a lot more pink. And so that's fine. The only thing is your tail will now be somewhere in the middle and not on the end, but that is okay. You can just slip stitch down one way and then come back and slip stitch down the other way, or you can use your darning needle and stitch it shut one way and then run it through and then stitch it shut the other way as well. But for this one I'm quite happy with how it worked out with this tail being on the end. So that's what I'm going to go with for this one. Alright, so I'm just going to grab my crochet hook, and since I'm right-handed I'm gonna have to rotate this. Make sure our other working yarn is out of the way. So what we're gonna do here is just put our crochet hook through the two nearest loops closest to our tail. So for this one, it'll be these two. And then just hook on to our tail and pull it through. And then we're just gonna continue doing that all the way along the bottom. So our next two would be here. Grab the yarn and then just pull through. So we're not single crocheting, we are just slip stitching. I suppose you could single crochet if you wanted to. It's not really necessary at this point, I don't think. And we'll just continue like that all the way to the end. So we are almost at the end here, and all we are going to do is darn off and weave in our end. Gonna go right to the end. This will be our last one here. Darning off, and then we'll grab our needle, darning needle. Just clipping off the end. And now our clutch is closed on the bottom. Actually, it looks pretty nice on the inside too. And that's what our slip stitch line will look like. And now it's time to work on our lining and zipper. So now we are going to work on our liner, and to begin with we are going to have our fabric right side up, and as you can see my fabric here is a bit wrinkled, and so I'm going to iron it, and this is really the one and only point in the process that you can iron it. And I really would suggest it if your fabric has any type of wrinkle at all in it, because once you iron it, it'll give it a nice crisp, clean look to the liner of your clutch. So I'm going to go iron my fabric and we will be right back. Okay, so now my fabric is all ironed out and looks nice and crisp and beautiful. And we are going to measure out our liner fabric. So we're going to take our clutch so far. If you would rather use measurements, you can measure the depth of your clutch and times that by 2 and then measure the width of your clutch. But as I said before, I have a pretty laid back approach to this. So this is the way that I usually do it. So we're going to set our clutch on the corner of our fabric. It's not going to go any further out than either the side or the top as we have it right now. And we're just going to take our scissors and we're going to mark where our end is here. And then we're going to take our clutch and keeping the bottom in the same spot, we're just going to flip it. And we are going to mark where our edge is here. So now we are just going to cut out that rectangle that we just made, and we will see you back in a bit. So I have cut my fabric out in the rectangle that we marked, and I have my fabric right side up, and we're going to take our 8-inch zipper, unzip it, and it is also going to be right side up, and we're going to place the bottom edge of it along the bottom edge of our fabric. So what I would usually do for this hand stitching portion is use a color of thread that either matches the zipper or matches our yarn. A heavier duty thread would be best, but for these purposes I'm just going to use our yarn, which can be a bit finicky because of the friction that is caused when you stitch it through, but I figured it would show up better on camera. So we are going to use our yarn and we're going to backstitch along here, and then we are going to adjust a bit and backstitch along, clip it to the top and backstitch along the other side. So since our working end of our yarn is kind of tied up being attached to our crocodile stitch portion of our clutch, we're going to kind of dig around in our skein and find the other end of our yarn. And so that's what I did here, and I threaded it through my darning needle. And I'm going to take quite a bit of yarn here. If you don't take enough, it's not a big deal. You can always just knot it and start over or get some more yarn. And so I'm going to take the end that I just cut off here and I'm going to tie a couple knots in it. If you're using a thread, especially a skinnier thread, you're going to want to tie at least 3 knots probably. Since this stuff is a bit more bulky, I've only tied 2. And since we want our knot to be on the wrong side of our fabric, we are going to come up from the bottom on our end here and go through our fabric and our zipper and pull everything through. So as I said, our yarn is going to go through quite a bit of friction as we go, and especially this type of yarn really doesn't always hold up, so we might feel it starting to pull apart at some point, and that is okay. We will just cut it off and get some more yarn and go from there. So we want our stitches on top to be about 1 centimeter long. If you want to, you can measure and mark with a pencil or a chalk pen or something, but I usually just eyeball it. There's also a few different ways that different people do the back stitch. This is just the way that I use. Feel free to use whichever way you prefer. So I'm gonna go down right close to where we did before. Pull everything through. We really want to make sure that we don't get tangled here. This part is time consuming, but I don't know a sewing machine that has a wide enough stitch for this, so at least my sewing machine doesn't. Because what we're going to end up doing here is using these stitches that we're creating on top of our zipper to double crochet through to attach our crocodile stitch portion to the zipper, and that's what's going to attach our lining, but you'll see what I'm talking about when we get there. So now I'm going to create a back stitch, and we don't want to make this too close to the working part of the zipper because we don't want our yarn getting caught in it. So we're gonna stay, I usually stay about halfway between the working end of the zipper and the edge. So I've gone over about 1 centimeter. I can already feel the friction getting to this yarn. So the reason I like the back stitch is that the stitches on top are going to be right side by side. There aren't going to be gaps. Now we're going back here. And we have our first back stitch. Now on the bottom, I'll show you what the bottom looks like. Gonna go from our end here, go over another centimeter about. Maybe should have started with a shorter piece of yarn. Hindsight is 20/20. And then going back here. And we have our second stitch. Not lined up 100%, but that's okay, it won't be very visible. So I'll do a few more here as we go. I'll shimmy this down a little bit, give us space. And we're going another approximately 1 centimeter over. Looks about right. Bless you. Got one dog sneezing and the other dog eating very loudly. So here's where we're at right now. My yarn has held up surprisingly well so far. As it gets shorter, it gets easier to work with. So this is what we've got so far. Is it absolutely gorgeous and flawless? definitely not. But that is okay because it's not going to look like this by the time we're done. So I ran into a spot where my yarn was getting a bit too frayed and a bit too weak. It was just kind of pulling apart like that. It was going to pull apart like that if I continued to use it. So I just cut it as well where it was still strong, and I'm going to give it a knot, and I'm going to make sure the knot is on the bottom side here. And then we're just going to keep going. You likely won't run into this if you're using thread. It's just part of using yarn. And it is a bit time consuming, but it'll be worth it. I'm gonna give it 3 knots just for good measure. We'll leave a little bit of a tail, but not much, and then just cut it there. This will all be inside in between your liner and your crochet crocodile stitch portion. So I'm just gonna cut myself some more yarn and give that a knot and keep going. So I've got my new yarn threaded here, and I didn't take as much as I did last time. So just gonna continue on. So I've got the knot that I made at the end of the last string, the end of the yarn I was using, and then this is the new one that I just put in the new distance of yarn I got here. So this is another way that some people like to backstitch, just in case you're wondering. I find that this way I kind of tend to go on a bit of an angle because you're coming right up right beside where your last stitch was. So I don't usually use this one, but I figured I'd show you to give you the option. So you come back up right beside where you went down. So I'm gonna flip this over to show you. So this is what it looked like in the first way I was back stitching, and then I switched ways, and then this is what the bottom's gonna look like the new way. And as you can see, I'm not very good at it this way because I always tend to go on an angle. You don't want to go into the exact same hole that you did before, because then you're just gonna undo your last stitch, so you have to go sort of right beside it. So this is why I don't use this one, because I'm not very good at it, but you might be a lot better at it than I am, and you might end up preferring it. So we're almost at our end here. We've got the end of our fabric here, and then the end of our zipper goes a bit further. So I'm going to do one more stitch, and I'm going to make sure to go past our little bumper of our zipper here. So about here. So each of these stitches on top here is going to have 1, 2, or maybe even 3 double crochets going through them. But on each of our ends, we're going to have quite a few, maybe more like 8 or 10, or maybe even more, depending on how everything is laying for you. So now that we've reached the end, what we're going to do is take our top part of the zipper here, part that is unattached. We're going to go to the top of our fabric, and we are going to lay it on top. We're going to make sure everything is lined up nicely. So to do that, to make it easier to make sure everything's lined up, I usually close my zipper. And then make sure that along our side here, the fabric is lined up nicely. And so it should also be nicely lined up on this side. So a nice straight line. what we don't want is it to be kind of overlapping one way or the other. We're going to line it up, and then we're going to take our binder clips and clip them on, and place our clip, making sure it's lined up along the top as well. Place our clip here. So what we're going to have in each of these stitches on the top, we're going to have 1, 2, or 3 even double crochets. But on our ends here, we are going to have 8 to 10 or maybe even more on our ends, just because of the way that the shape of the clutch. So we're going to make sure that it is well reinforced when we go from the bottom half of the zipper to the top half of the zipper, and then we're going to do the same thing on this side as we're finishing off. So since I finished on the bottom here, I'm going to come back up. And we're going to make sure that this stitch is behind this zipper bumper here. So I'm going across here and making sure we got both the zipper and the fabric. Come back up just a little bit beside our other hole here. So we're just beside the hole that we just made going down into that side. Oh, got this other yarn into play. We're gonna make sure it's nice and tight. We don't want it too baggy there. And just beside this stitch, making sure we're going through both the zipper fabric and our other fabric. So I'm gonna go back and forth 3 times here, but if you're using thread, you might want to go more like 5. Alright, so I'm going to make sure I go in this side about where I want my line to start, so in between the working part of the zipper and the end, about halfway in between. Still making sure I'm not going ahead of the bumper here. And then I'm going to turn my work and do the exact same thing we did on this side, down on this side. So we just finished our 3 stitches going from one side of the zipper to the other here, or 5 stitches or even more, whatever you're comfortable with if you're using thread. And so now, since we ended with our working yarn on the bottom here, we are going to come over about 1 centimeter and come up. And back to about where we were. And we have our first back stitch on our top side here. Moving my clip down. Going to go another centimeter from our farthest yarn there. This part is really ugly. Try to ignore that. Coming through. It's not going to look ugly once we actually have our double crochets going through them. So there's our second stitch on our top. Our third. So I will see you when we get to this end. So again, here my yarn was getting a little bit fragile, so I cut it off and gave it a good knot there, and now I'm going to go back. So just following what I would have done next, I would have been coming up through here. And I've already knotted the end of this new piece of yarn. I'm going down through here. I'm going to be going past my knot here. Oh, that's a little more than a centimeter. And we'll just keep going. So we are back, and I am almost done stitching up this side of our zipper. I've just got another one here to go. Down through here. And now we are going to do the same thing we did on this side. We're going to make sure it's nice and reinforced going from one side of the zipper to the other. And in this case, we're going to make sure our zipper is all the way closed, and we're going to give it probably about 5 millimeters space here, just because, again, we don't want our yarn getting caught in the zipper. So you can also just look at your little bumpers here too to give you an idea. Just make sure we're a little bit, probably about 5 millimeters on this side of our bumper. So I'm just going to go back a little bit here just so we can line it up properly. Now we're going to make sure we're only going through our zipper fabric layer and our first layer of our lining fabric here. We don't want to stitch through everything because that would make our clutch kind of funny looking. So we're just going to go across here. And we're going to focus a bit more on making sure this is tight because these two ends don't always want to be together. So we're going to tighten it a bit more than we usually would. It might seem a little bit too closed right now, but it'll loosen up as we go. we're making sure we're going through both the zipper fabric and our liner fabric. Just one layer of our liner fabric. And there we have our 3 rows, 3 stitches on that side. So now we are going to stitch our sides shut. And since this piece of yarn I have here is actually still in pretty good shape, I'm actually just going to continue with this yarn down here. I use the back stitch because I find it to be a very sturdy stitch, but you can of course use whatever stitch that you want. And then we are going to knot it and cut it and then head over to the other side and stitch up that side as well. So when we're starting here, we're gonna want to adjust a little bit and make sure that we are going through these 2 layers as close to the zipper as possible without going through the zipper material. So my zipper material, I'm just gonna stick my finger in there and make sure it's not getting caught in where I want to stitch. So I've got it pinched here. And I'm gonna go right through there. And then through both layers, up nice and tight to the zipper. And I've gone through, so I'm just gonna double check and make sure everything is lined up real nice. I don't claim to be a professional at hand stitching. Not all people who crochet are good at sewing. I'm definitely better at crocheting than I am sewing, especially by hand. So yeah, I'm about a bit less than a centimeter along from the edge here, and that's okay. Little strings of fabric are gonna come off. And that's all right too. All right, so our liner is now complete. We've stitched on both sides of the zipper and we've stitched up and down each side of our lining. Does it look nice? Absolutely not. It is not pretty, but that is okay because it's the inside that everyone is going to see, and that looks quite nice actually. So now the next step is to add our plastic canvas. So we have our plastic canvas and our liner. So we're just going to put the corner of our plastic canvas on top of our liner, and we're going to go about 1 centimeter in from each side. So a centimeter in from this side, from the top, and then from each of the other 2 sides. So again, if you want to measure it, you can. I usually just eyeball it. And so the nice thing about the plastic canvas is it's got these lines. So you usually just do a little mark where you want it on one side and another mark on the other side, making sure not to cut our liner. And then we just cut where our marks are. So there we've got one, and we're just going to go put that back on the canvas and make the other one the exact same size. I'm doing the exact same thing. So now we have two pieces of plastic canvas the same size. Now we are going to take our clutch, our crocodile stitch crocheted portion of our clutch, and we're going to put both sheets of plastic canvas inside. Now if at any point your plastic canvas is sticking out up the top, you're going to want to trim it, because you don't want it to be sticking out and making your liner be really tight. So mine is sticking out a little bit, so I'm just going to trim it, a couple of these lines on the plastic canvas. I'm just gonna do a couple rows of these lines here, cut that off. It was a little tight on the sides too, so I'm gonna cut a couple off the sides as well. Just one side, so it wasn't too bad. So we'll try again, stick them in. And that looks good. We'd rather them be lower than too high. So here they're sitting about 1.5 centimeters lower than our clutch, and now is the exciting part when we get to add our liner. So we're going to make sure the liner goes in between these two pieces of plastic canvas. Sticking it in. At this point it doesn't really matter if it's a bit bunched up on the bottom. You can always stick your hand in when we're done and move it around a bit, however you need. And now we are just going to attach our liner. So how we do that is we're going to remove our stitch marker and put our hook back in. So there's two options here. We're going to go all the way around, and you can either double crochet or single crochet. And what I base that on is whether or not I want the zipper to really be seen, if I want like the color of the zipper to really pop. So for example, for this one, I thought the black of the zipper was really sharp, and I thought it looked really nice, so I only did a single crochet around the top. Whereas this one, I did a double crochet because I had a gray zipper on this one, and there wasn't really the right shade of gray available, so I kind of wanted to hide the zipper a little bit. I mean, it can still be seen if you look from the top, but I did the double crochet around here because I didn't exactly want it to be super visible. So whichever you choose, for this one I think I'm going to do the double crochet. I think that there is enough catching your eye as it is with the colors being so bright on this one. So I'm going to double crochet all the way around. So as I said, the liner might not be fitting the greatest right now, It might be kind of bunched up on the inside, but that's all right. Once we're done, we'll just stick our hand in there and spread it out as we want it. So I have, I'm just gonna zoom in here. So our crochet hook is through our loop, and we're just going to grab whichever one of these stitches is closest. So as I said, I'm going to do double crochets, so I'm going to yarn over and go through, bring it through. Oh, I lost my yarn over. Yarn over, go through, bring it back, yarn over, and complete my double crochet. The first couple, it's gonna take some getting used to, but it'll get easier. So we're just gonna do that all the way around, and so each of your stitches on here is going to have likely 2, sometimes even 3 stitches going through it, and then on the ends here we're going to be stitching through quite a bit as we go around. So my next one here, I'm gonna go through the same stitch. This is gonna be a lovely blue border around the top. So just like we did before, we are going to go through the hole in between the 2 sides of the scale once we get to those parts. And then go through the stitch on the zipper and pull through everything when we do our double crochet. So we're going through every double crochet in the line of double crochets behind our crocodile stitch here. So this is our line of double crochets, and we're going to go through every single one of these V's at the top here. And we are not going to go 2 in this loop between our scales like we did before. We'll just do 1. So now we're going to go through all 3 of these, this stitch that's been reinforced 3 times on all the stitches all the way around until we come to one that lines up with this stitch right here, where we keep going straight on the other side. or through those 3 and through that. And completing the double crochet. Turning our work as we go. And making sure we go through the hole in the middle of our scale here. And through here. So we've gone through the middle here. And still going through our nice reinforced end. Starting to look real nice here. We're getting pretty close to the end of having to go through the end loops here. Might do one more and then we'll go on to the straight end. Alright, so now we're going into this stitch right here, and then we'll continue going down that side. And we are back. Now I do have to apologize. I forgot to press the record button as I was finishing off here. I guess I just got a little bit too excited about finishing this project. So I went all the way around our zipper here, and I came back up to right here. You can see was our initial chain 3 stitch, and then this was my last double crochet. And so what I did was I just slip stitched into the chain 3, darned off, and weaved in my ends. So luckily it wasn't a very complicated part that I forgot to record. Another option to do here is, instead of slip stitching and darning off, is you can just take your needle and thread your yarn and then just kind of weave it in really nicely without actually slip stitching and darning off. And as long as you weave it in a lot of different directions and nice and tight, then you shouldn't have any issues. All right, and our clutch is now complete. Here's the outside, and here's the inside. It's lined and reinforced, and it's got enough space for you to pack some of your necessities. And take them on the go. And it's durable enough that you're not going to feel like your crochet portion is going to stretch or things are going to fall through. So it's a lovely little clutch. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial.